Texas. I'm back. Just like Jack Nicholson, I'm back. So it was missed y'all. Thank you so much, Michelle, for taking care of everybody while I was gone. It's been a challenging few weeks here, but it's good to be back, and I know that you were in capable hands with Michelle the whole time.
Well, I'm sure folks are really glad you're back, Deb, because I know they missed you. So it's great to have you back.
Well, it's been, kind of challenging. As Michelle told you, I was back home in the hills with my sister Denise, who was sick, and she's on the mend. We got to take care of Denise because she does our taxes for us, and she takes care of the whole family doing our taxes. And oh, God knows, yeah, she got the math gene, so she's the useful member of the family. So yeah, we have to take real good care of her. But she was doing better, and she's got little twin granddaughters, and they both had RSV, which is a really nasty infection. They're just 4 months old, almost 5 months now. So one of them was hospitalized, so that was pretty scary. And just man, keeping everybody healthy these days is a real challenge. But we just got to all take care of each other. That's the best we can do. I hated to miss. Oh my goodness, I can't believe I missed the events at Wallace. And so that's Michelle and I are going to talk about that with you today. Right behind me, the guys are helping themselves. There's JD and Dr. Jake and Crystal, and I see Brother Frank way there in the background, all helping themselves to a chuck wagon dinner that Doc Jones and his lovely wife Laura had prepared along with their friends. And the events at Fort Wallace the weekend of the 9th, 10th, and 11th were just pretty special. And I just hated so much to miss it. But we're going to tell you about a lot of the cool things that went on, some real special times.
Deb, I don't know if a lot of our viewers appreciate, obviously, the amount of work that goes into the events that take place at Fort Wallace. And, for me, I mean, obviously, you had the evening concert with the museum's great friend and supporter, Michael Martin Murphy.
Mhm.
But for me, and really probably most important, is the fact that you had Friday and part of Saturday dedicated to school groups who brought their
Yeah.
students for field trips and took them around the museum grounds and in the buildings. They got to meet living historians. Our good friend Henry Crawford came from Texas. And, the value of what the museum provided for the students that day, exposing them to various facets of Kansas's history, American Western history, is really incalculable. And it takes so much time and work and effort. And so, Dr. Jake and JD and Henry and Jane and Ramona and the whole staff at the museum really go above and beyond. But Deb, there's a project that you've been involved in at the museum that's really near and dear to your heart that was presented to the public for the first time over that event weekend.
Yeah, it really did break my heart to miss this, but the Ruth Jackson Reading Room of the Captain Miles W. Keogh Research Library was dedicated on Saturday, September 11th. And that has been a real labor of love for a lot of people. And the Dane Hansen Foundation was a huge sponsor for that. Jane is our master grant writer. I don't know what we would do without her grant writing skills. And the Dane Hansen Foundation that serves Northwest Kansas has been so generous with our programming at the museum. And we had actually a library component has been a part of the museum plan for 20 years or better, and it may have even been part of the original plan. I think the organization itself, the Fort Wallace Memorial Association, is about to turn 100. So that's yeah, just nearly a century. And then the museum was downtown Main Street Wallace. in one of the old buildings there, and then they built what is our cornerstone. Really, it's the main room of what is our museum now. Was the museum in its totality for many years, and then the state came along and needed to put restroom facilities there on the highway. And when they did that, it was a game changer because they put
Mhm.
in water and sewage and improved the front, the parking lot, the front of the museum, and it just that enabled a lot of things to happen. I have to tell you, the land that the museum it's set on, it has been set on that land, sit, sat, sit, sat, sat, set. Is that how it goes? So um, it uh, was called the Roman Nose Battlefield. And so that ground, that's part of the battlefield, from the battle at Fort Wallace in 1867. So
1867.
the land where the it actually sets is the Roman Nose battlefield, and that is before the highway route was changed. And so the highway ran
Mhm.
down Main Street Wallace for many years, and then when Highway 40 was straightened, then it kind of cut through the middle of Roman Nose battlefield. So it's just such an interesting story. So I'm way past making a long story short there, but anyway, for a long time, the museum has been evolving, and the what the museum would be and how it would serve its mission and serve the community has evolved. And Michelle has behind her the part of the Milford Becker edition that opened in 2017, which is just spectacular and continues to evolve. The Butterfield Overland Dispatch stagecoach, and then the adjutant's office, the recreation of the adjutant's office,
Mhm.
which I think is my favorite thing in the museum. It just touches my heart so much. And that desk to the right of the adjutant's office in the photograph behind Michelle is the adjutant's desk that was in the adjutant's office. So that everybody would have sat at that desk, at some point. Keogh, Beecher, the commanders that came through, Barnett's, Custer might have sat there at some point. I mean, anybody that came through would have sat down. Sherman, Sheridan, those guys passed through. It's very possible they sat down at that desk. So
I
it's
liked I like to think that Albert sat there at that desk and wrote some of his letters to
the
Jenny
letters to Jenny.
back home. So for folks who are not familiar with the history of the fort, Captain Albert Barnett was posted there. He was there in 1867, and he writes a series of letters to his wife, who's back in Ohio,
A
and
willful, selfish little mortal.
a willful, selfish little mortal. Which, seriously, I mean, you could use that phrase to describe a lot of officers' wives in that time period. Um, but he writes his letters back and forth with his wife Jenny. She's in Ohio. He also keeps his journal. So I've always there's that kind of romantic part of me that likes to think that's where Barnett sat and wrote to Jenny, and she asked him for advice and input on carpets and draperies. And I'm sure he probably thought, Jenny, what? I'm out here facing potential death, and you're asking me about carpets and upholsteries. And okay, I'll give you my input, sweetheart. Here we go. Um, but
Uh,
there were their letters,
probably
and
Probably it would have been more like Clark Gable. Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. If he'd been
yeah,
honest.
probably.
But
But
yeah,
if you read their letters back and forth and his journal that he kept, actually, our good friend Bob Utley did extensive research into the Barnettses and has a great edited volume that he published, "Life in Custer's Cavalry." It's about the Barnettses, um, which my signed copy that he signed to me is one of my prized possessions. But anyway. Yeah, I've always liked to think that maybe that's where Barnett sat and did his writing to Jenny, and maybe he sat there and read Jenny's letters and shook and scratched his head and thought, "Oh dear," you know. Um,
Maybe.
but I also like that. I also do like that thought that perhaps Miles Keogh sat at that desk. I'm sure he did, and for those who maybe are not familiar with the incredible Irishman Miles
I
Keogh.
don't know how
uh,
they could not be familiar with that if they've watched if they've watched
I
Around
know.
more than 5 episodes, they've heard us talk about Theo, so, yeah.
Well, I mean, let's face it. When I teach survey American history courses and I talk about the 19th century in the West and I talk about the military in the West, and in particular, I obviously pay a lot of attention to Kansas and the West at certain time periods. And whenever I talk about different military posts, I always talk about Fort Wallace and its connection to various events. And I always flash up a photograph of Miles Keogh, and literally you can hear the sighs in my classrooms of all the young ladies who
Oh,
go, "Ooh," and then I get the inevitable, "Miss Martin, he was a hottie, wasn't he?" And I'm like, "Yes, ladies, he was a hottie."
yes, he was.
So, in my which is such a sexist thing for us to do, but we can't help it. Um, so in my classes, my female students would keep lists of what they called historical hotties, and Miles Keogh was always real high on the list of historical hotties, right up there with the real Almanzo Wilder, who was one handsome fella, and Wyatt Earp. So, what is it about Kansas that attracts those historical
Well,
hotties?
something
But
in the water, something in the water. So when
Right,
Miles
your
Keogh
library's named for him.
I know. When Miles Keogh was commander of Fort Wallace, we are the only post he ever commanded. He was commander from the fall of 66 through the summer of 67. And he established the first library in Wallace County. And that was, of course, on the post at Fort Wallace. He wanted, the men were seriously out in the middle of nowhere. It really was a far flung post. And he wanted distraction and inspiration and entertainment. And he cared very much about education. So Miles was quite educated, coming from a fairly well to do family in Ireland, as he did. And he valued education. And so we thought it was really appropriate that we name that library. And we hope that this reading room is our first step in a major library. But the reading room, after Ruth Jackson, who was a local historian who taught many of the folks who still live in Wallace County and would sit around the Rubidoo table there in the museum and share the history of Wallace County and western Kansas and eastern Colorado. And the reading room is named for her, and the library is named for Miles. And honoring those two people together just seems really, really appropriate. So we're very excited to have that started. We're getting some really serious collections donated to us. Our dear friend DK Clark is making a very significant gift of his books and manuscripts to the library. Tom Ebert, who is from California, who retired from Fresno State University and was the librarian there and has a really extensive collection of books on the American West, has been sending us volumes from his collection or purchasing volumes to send us for 2 years. He actually created a bibliography for us. When I sat down one day at the museum with him, and he said he was a librarian, and I said, "This is what we want to do," and we hadn't started working on the room yet. And he said, "This is what you need." And he created a bibliography and sent it to me along with books. And we just can't be thankful enough for him. And then our dear friend Mark Smith, who just gets things done, a while back said, we need to make it a reality. And he hired master carpenter Danny Kane, who just put his heart and soul into this project, was so passionate about it. And Danny died unexpectedly just a few weeks before the project was complete. And his son Bobby, who is a master finisher, has come in to finish the project. And he's still working on it, but it's for the most part done. And it was done enough to show to the public on September 11th. And uh, what a memorial it is to Danny's um, passion for his craft and his commitment to what we were accomplishing there. He even donated personally to the project himself, in addition to his time and talent and ability. So uh, it just reiterates it really does take a village and everybody putting something into it, and it's just it's incredible. I'm so proud of it.
Deb, one of the things that I'm not sure our viewers can understand or comprehend or realize is the importance for a museum, especially at a place like Fort Wallace and Wallace there. It's so important for local communities to be able to have a repository for not only historical artifacts, but also documents, books, that the printed materials, those archival materials. Because what ends up happening in many cases, they end up in boxes and attics, they get thrown away, they get destroyed. Um, or they get boxed up and they get sent to bigger cities like Topeka or Kansas City or Wichita. And then the community loses the ability to be able to engage with that history or to add to it. And so by having this library and reading room and your locked bookcases, your cabinets for storing manuscripts and original materials and photographs, you're really serving a really important role in the county as a repository for not just the history that's related to the West and Kansas in the West and the fort and the activities that took place in that region, but also the community and the county history. Because you, in
Absolutely.
essence, become a county repository for those important documents. And that attracts historical researchers from all over the
Yes.
country and, in some cases, other parts of the world when we can open up safely, with COVID and travel restrictions and things, when we're able to getting back to traveling more normally, that brings people into the museum. So you have another way to share that story
Yeah.
with a broader audience. And that puts you on the map as a center for research. And that is just as important.
Oh, absolutely. Our friend Terry Mort, who just published the book Cheyenne Summer on Beecher Island, the events at Beecher Island, published by Pegasus, he was going to join us at Fort Wallace, and his wife became ill, and he wasn't able to. So we're hoping to get Terry back there. He actually lives in Tucson. So, and we do have his book though, so you can come by and pick up the book. Um, so he I think was going to highlight, we were a tremendous resource for Terry in the research of his book, and DK spoke to that. How important this is as you know to preserve the stories that we're connected to. And so we hope that members of the community or the public at large that maybe had family members who served at Wallace or were connected somehow will share some of their stories and letters with us, that we want to be a good steward of those items
Hmm.
and keep them for future researchers. And history is all about how many voices can be heard. And we get a more clear picture, a more accurate picture, the more voices that we can find and share. So that's what it's all about, and we're just so thrilled to have this to be able to share. I want to give a shout out to Bill Rennie, who portrays Miles Keogh and has done so for many moons. He is actually from New York City, and he came out to be with us and portrayed Keo for a while and represented him at the dedication. So it's always fun when Bill can join us too. So takes a big village.
Well, I wish I could have been there. I always love the time I spend in Wallace and at the museum and in the area. I always love being there. Western Kansas is just a fantastic place. We can be super hopping and busy at the museum. And even when we're busy, simply because we're out in those beautiful wide open spaces and get those great views in Western Kansas, we can be busy, 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 but I still feel like I'm decompressing even when we're busy, just because that space and the view and the the friendliness and the warmth of everybody there. And that's definitely something you do not find here in Arizona, but boy, you certainly find that in Western Kansas.
Well, y'all come and see us. So we're really proud of it and looking forward to doing even more cataloging and housing collections as they come in. Mike Bond is also gifting us with a lot of things. We're just already getting some tremendous gifts. So we're very, very excited about that. And thanks to everybody who supported this project in one way or another. Um, it's going to serve us for a long, long time, long after we're gone, and that makes me very happy.
Well done, everyone at the Fort Wallace Museum.
We'll
We'll
be
be
right.
right back with our wildlife segment.
In 1821, a trade route was opened from Missouri in the United States across prairies and mountains to Mexico. In 2021, we will mark 200 years of epic conflicts and grand adventures, larger-than-life personalities, and sweeping landscapes. Join us on an historic journey. The Santa Fe Trail lives on.
Find us on social media or santafetrail.org. Welcome to the Western Kansas Wildlife Travel Center, right here in my hometown of Oakley, Kansas. We're the front door of Western Kansas, located on 3 main highways, I-70, US 83, and US 40. And all those roads lead to history, beautiful scenery, and adventure, no matter which direction you go. We now have an IHOP. That brand that you've trusted up and down the road in all your travels is staffed with local folks, real people, just like you and me, and we're waiting on you to join us. So for fun, adventure, fuel up, fuel your body, and let's have some fun.
Welcome back to Around Kansas Wildlife, and the wildlife is actually going on around me here at the house. I'm actually with Noelle and Salina right now recording, and so you can hear the wildebeest in the next room. So 4, almost 5. She is almost 5 and 3. So that's about as wild as it gets.
Well, they
But
would
rather
fit right
talk
in
about
out. Say, hey, your wild ones there, Deb. Boy, they would fit right in out on the prairie with the Kansas prairie chicken, would they not?
yeah, all those dances and showing off and all that stuff. Yeah, yeah.
And all that booming that goes on too. They would definitely fit right in. As a matter of fact, they might give those prairie chickens a run for their money.
They just might, and it might just scare off all the prairie. It could be the key to increasing the prairie chicken population because they'd scare them all away, and they would hide and multiply somewhere. So today we're going to revisit. This is a segment I did a while back, and lest you wake up and think that some incredible election upset has occurred. No, when this was originally recorded, Sam Brownback was the governor. So I was looking at that and I was going through it and I'm like, this information is still really good. But no, Laura Kelly, as of today, is still the governor.
Yes.
And you know, so yeah, no upsets, people. This is just a great program that was put in place back when Sammy was running the state. So yeah, we just thought this would be a fun one to share again with you today.
Oh, so let's take a trip back in time in the Around Kansas archives and look at the Prairie Chicken.
Well, folks, once more it is time to count your chickens. And I know some of you are very familiar with the Prairie Chickens of Kansas, and some of you not so much. And some of you may spend your time counting the Prairie Chickens. And the Prairie Chicken count just started. Let's take a look. Aerial surveys began a few days ago and continue through mid-May in 5 states, including Kansas, that contain lesser prairie chicken habitat. The surveys are conducted annually by the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies to document population trends and the species' response to management strategies identified in the Lesser Prairie Chicken Range-Wide Conservation Plan. This survey is critical to provide annual estimates of the lesser prairie chicken population across 5 states, explained Roger Wolf, manager of the program. These population estimates help guide decisions related to conservation efforts targeting lesser prairie chickens and their habitat. The range-wide plan is a collaborative effort of the WAFWA and the Kansas Department of Wildlife, Parks, and Tourism, as well as state wildlife agencies in Texas, New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Colorado. It was developed to ensure the conservation of the lesser prairie chicken with voluntary cooperation of landowners and industry, and allows agricultural producers and industry to continue operations while reducing impacts to the bird and its grassland habitat. The surveys will be conducted by helicopter in locations chosen at random within Lesser Prairie Chicken Range. Preliminary results from the 2018 surveys will be available beginning July 1st. Just last fall, the WAFWA finalized permanent conservation agreements with 3 private landowners to conserve more than 3,500 acres of high-quality lesser prairie chicken habitat in northwest Kansas. These were the first easements obtained in the shortgrass ecoregion, and the organization applauded the visionary landowners who are protecting and conserving the landscape as working ranches, ensuring they will be enjoyed by future generations. These easements will protect habitat that benefits a whole host of wildlife species, including the lesser prairie chicken. This is another positive step toward establishing a stronghold for lesser prairie chickens in this area. The complex of properties is located near Smoky Valley Ranch in Logan County, which is owned and managed by the Nature Conservancy. The nearly 18,000-acre ranch is identified in the range-wide plan as a potential target around which a stronghold for lesser prairie chickens could be established. A stronghold is defined as a block of fairly contiguous grassland consisting of at least 25,000 acres that contains at least 6 mating areas for the birds. There must also be assurances that all the properties contributing to a stronghold will be protected from future development and managed in a way that is beneficial to lesser prairie chickens into the future. With additional easements, Smoky Valley Ranch and nearby permanently conserved properties could become a stronghold for the species. The Lesser Prairie Chicken Range-Wide Conservation Plan is available online.
Howdy, I'm Seth Hayes, and welcome to my hometown, from then to now. Council Grove has a rich history as deep as the prairie tallgrass. Spend the day visiting 25 historic sites, or explore the unique shops and restaurants, or mosey out of town along the Santa Fe Trail. You all visit my hometown, Council Grove, in the heart of the Flint Hills.
Okay, looks like it's time for our tour. Welcome to the Fort Wallace Museum. Here at the museum, you're going to find some really interesting stuff like our replica stagecoach from the Butterfield Overland Dispatch. We've got facades from the fort buildings. We've got an 1870s flag. There's a plesiosaur that was discovered locally. We've got the Ray pump organ collection. We're a little bitty place with a great big story, and we'd love to have you.
Welcome back, and it's going to be an exciting weekend in Medicine Lodge. The Peace Treaty Pageant will be going on, and they just pull out all the stops for this event with a reenactment and all kinds of exhibits, and it's just really incredible. So in the illustration behind me, the original Peace Treaty was illustrated in Harper's Weekly. I don't know what we would do without Harper's Weekly. It is a gold mine of illustrations. And this was some of the participants in the peace treaty negotiations. There were several tribes that were there, and thousands and thousands of people in attendance, and an incredible event. And Medicine Lodge is still a really interesting town today. The landscape around there is pretty incredible. One of the really distinctive landscapes of Kansas. So if you've not spent much time in that area, be sure to go. And in addition to the peace treaty, Medicine Lodge has another really interesting piece of history that Michelle is going to tell you about.
Well, right now, folks, behind me, we are actually looking at the parlor where Carrie Nation would sit and think about all of her temperance activities for the Women's Christian Temperance Union and the Anti-Saloon League, because Carrie Nation, for a period of time, lived in Medicine Lodge, Kansas. And you see the large portrait on the wall of Carrie there with her hatchet. And as we all know, we're familiar with the stories of Carrie Nation going to visit different communities with her army of hatchet-wielding women who would go ahead and go into saloons and smash up the bars and the wooden casks with the beer and the whiskey and the other spirits to make the point that alcohol was not beneficial to society. And before you all kind of demonize Carrie and write her off as someone who was a bit of a crank, you have to understand that Carrie and many of the women who embraced the temperance movement had been, the victims of what we would consider today to be domestic abuse, domestic violence, neglect on the part of husbands or fathers or male family members who had taken to drink, an excessive drink, and were not able to provide financially for their families, or in some cases neglected them or physically abused them. So she just didn't wake up one day and have an epiphany and say, I'm going to go smash up bars with a hatchet. She came by that through, sadly, personal experience and understanding the personal experiences of other women that she knew. So if you go to Medicine Lodge and you're going to visit that weekend for the Peace Treaty Pageant, you really should go ahead and also plan to stop at the Carrie Nation home. I absolutely love it. Every time I go through Medicine Lodge, it's a stop. I'm still fascinated with her and her crusade. And so you get a little bit of an idea of what her life was like in Kansas.
That's a beautiful parlor, and what an incredible painting of her. That's amazing. Well, the peace treaty itself has long fascinated me, and the most interesting, or one of the more interesting, because every facet of it is interesting, but one of the correspondents who covered the peace treaty was Henry Morton Stanley. And Henry Morton Stanley, the man who famously found Dr. Livingstone, after through the jungles, Stanley
Mhm.
and Livingston, Henry Morton Stanley. If you put a historical marker on this planet for every place that he set foot, you couldn't turn around without stepping into one of those.
Mhm.
He was here, he was there, he was everywhere. So he's a young man. He's actually a veteran of both armies in the Civil War, and he is a young correspondent in Western Kansas. And when all the correspondents are gathering there in Medicine Lodge and talking about all the Plains tribes who are coming in and the leaders who are going to be there, the name of Satanta loomed large. And Satanta was one of the most famous and feared of the Plains tribesmen at that point. Satanta was a Kiowa leader. He was known as a great orator, and even people who did not understand him, could not understand his words, understood the power of his words. And his speeches are eloquent, and they ring equally eloquent today. The language he used was just beautiful. So the correspondents began talking about Satanta. And of course, Henry Morton Stanley, who is the veteran in this group, having been out here a few months longer than the rest of them, the old guy, he starts telling them about Satanta. And they're like, oh, wow, you really know him. You couldn't have written this script better. Satanta walks in. I think they were maybe in a store at some public gathering place like that. Satanta walks in and basically throws open his arms and says, "My old friend Stanley," and hugs Henry Morton Stanley. So you know that their jaws are just dropping to the ground.
Mhm.
And I dare say even Finding Dr. Livingston could not have been as well timed and as
Yeah.
on cue as Satanta walking in when those guys were hearing all about that legendary figure.
Deb, the peace treaty, and I think this is going to be interesting for our viewers. The peace treaty, another story that I find really fascinating about this, of course, is the fact that this is coming hot on the heels of numerous conflicts between the United States military and the Cheyenne. And in particular, this is coming, after the infamous Sand Creek Massacre that took place during the Civil War in Colorado, where Black Kettle and other Cheyenne were, of course, there and were a part of. And after the activities and the events at Sand Creek, there were three Cheyenne children that were picked up by different Army soldiers. They were young soldiers who picked up these three children. And there were two sisters and one boy. And the boy the officers sold him out to a circus sideshow, and he was kind of taken around as, if you will, a sideshow act.
Mhm.
And one of the girls was used as basically a servant. And that young girl and that boy eventually they died. They both contracted disease and died, but one young female child survived. And she eventually was taken in by some ladies, a couple of older ladies who were living in Colorado, and they were trying to bring her up the best they could. And Samuel Tappan, who is a member of the U.S. delegation to the Medicine Lodge Peace Treaty proceedings, he hears and is in communication with the Cheyenne. And one of the things the Cheyenne demand is that they will sit down and talk peace if and only if the children who were taken at Sand Creek are returned. So Tappan has to investigate and find out what's happened, and he ends up making his way to Colorado and discovers this young girl. And he finds that the soldiers had named her Minnehaha. It was the only native name they knew. Of course,
Right.
it's a contrived name from literature. And so he takes charge of Minnie. He shortens her name to Minnie. We're not completely sure what her actual given Cheyenne name might have been. And he takes her and brings her to Kansas, and he's wanting to return her to the Cheyenne, but she's been away long enough, just long enough, and she's terrified. And you have to think the trauma she went through the last time she was with her people. They were attacked at Sand Creek, and when he tries to bring her back to the Cheyenne, she will not go.
And of
And
course,
so
that's 3 or 4 very formative years in a child's life.
yes,
That's
yes,
yeah.
yes. And so he guarantees them that he will personally ensure her safety, and
Hmm.
he will care for her. And it's one of the reasons the Cheyenne will actually sit down and talk peace. And it's interesting because Minnie eventually goes back to Boston with Tappan, and Tappan was a spiritualist. And he enrolls her in the Boston Spiritualist Lyceum School. And he actually holds spiritualist seances in his home to try to contact the spirits of the dead Cheyenne from Sand Creek, because he wants to know what should he do, how should he guide
Yeah.
her.
Yeah.
And eventually, Minnie, he takes her to Washington, D.C., and enrolls her at Howard University, which started as a school to educate African Americans in the post-war period. But they had this really open-minded doctrine of accepting any students, regardless of race, regardless of financial status. And also, they were one of the first higher ed institutions to integrate and have young women as part of the student body. And so Minnie ends up at Howard University, and she's studying in the music department. And sadly, Minnie dies of tuberculosis in 1873 in her dorm room. And they segregate her off because of her TB, or consumption, as they called it, and she dies in Washington, D.C. But it's interesting how Medicine Lodge and what took place in Kansas has these long fingers that reach eastward
Yeah.
later on.
So
And
many.
that's always been to me, one of the most fascinating stories connected to Sand Creek and Medicine Lodge. And
Yeah.
actually, in my dissertation I'm writing, Minnie figures in. She's there when someone in my dissertation, who's a young Indigenous fella, is attending Howard, and they cross paths with one another. So it shows it's a very small world, and Medicine Lodge looms large.
Medicine Lodge was a huge piece of the interaction on the plains in the 19th century. And again, thousands in attendance. So the stories that come from that, the Kiowa, the Arapaho, the Cheyenne, those
Mhm.
tribes who were there and encamped, and their relationships with each other. I mean, the tribes greatly outnumbered uh, the white people who were in attendance, but the
Mhm.
white people who were there, like you mentioned, Tappan, you've got some movers and shakers, and it's and some of the soldiers who were there, and it's there are no end to the stories. And so yeah, go to Medicine Lodge and observe how they commemorate this famous event, but then yeah, learn some more about it, because it's just a fascinating piece of the story. And I guess I'm just trying to remember, but I think this is going to be the last of the big treaty negotiations. There's nothing
Mhm.
comparable after this. There are others,
That's
but
right.
there's nothing on this scale
Nothing on this
after.
scale, exactly.
Yeah. So it's
Yeah,
an
and
incredible story.
folks, if you go to Medicine Lodge to the commemorative weekend, one of the things with the peace treaty reenactment, you get this amazing panorama of history. They start with the native history. They move into what happens when we have the Spanish and the French
Mhm.
and the British in the region. They move through those periods of time and take you all the way up through the negotiations of the actual Medicine Lodge peace treaty in 1867. So you're getting this massive swath of historical time. that they go ahead and portray for you. And then, of course, there are other kinds of events that take place. In downtown, they have other venues where they interpret and reenact different events in the history
Hmm.
of Medicine Lodge. I know there's a bank robbery that takes place in Medicine Lodge. They reenact. So some kind of old west bank robbery, law and order, other aspects of the community's history. And folks, if you're out that way, also, if you think about it, run to the little town of Argonia.
Okay.
You've seen on Around Kansas, I've shared the story of Susanna Madora Salter, the first female mayor in the United States, who was elected to that office on the temperance ticket in Argonia, Kansas. You're not too far. Drive through Argonia, you can go by her house. It's worth just taking that drive because the Gypsum Hills country and that part
Oh,
of Kansas
so
is
pretty.
stunning, and especially in the fall when the temperatures are cooler, the air is not as hazy. You get those beautiful, vivid ochres and oranges and red in the hills, contrasted with, some of the gold grass, and it's absolutely stunning. So it gives you a little extra drive, some beautiful windshield time, and you can take in a little more Kansas history.
Yeah. So wherever you go around Kansas, be sure to tell them that Deb and Michelle sent you and send us your pictures, share your stories with us. Let us know what you would like to see on Around Kansas. And once again, it's great to be back with you.
Well, it's great having you back, Deb. We're so glad you're home.
Me too. I'm Deb Goodrich,
And I'm Michelle Martin.
and we will see you somewhere around
Around
Kansas.
Kansas.
Thanks so much. See you later.
Bye.